It's budget day in Canada, and this is a big budget. This one is, if it passes, going to spend a ton of money. It's going to cut a lot of programs and jobs. And this is what the government says we need to protect Canada. On the other hand, you've got the Conservatives saying you cannot spend that much money because if you do, you're going to have to print money. That's going to lead to more inflation. That will eventually lead to higher interest rates. And we're going to go through what we just went through over the last number of years. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if the NDP is going to support this budget or not. But right now, it seems like it comes down to 3. The Liberals need 3 votes to get this budget passed. And if it doesn't pass, we're going to be having a Christmas election. Wild. I'm here to tell you that tomorrow I will have lots of coverage on the federal budget right here on Scott Fox After 9. Today, I want to talk about Premier Doug Ford and that infamous Ronald Reagan ad that has garnered so much attention around the world. And to do it, I've got a special guest on this episode. He is the Queen's Park Bureau Chief for Global News. He's the host of Focus Ontario and the president of the Queen's Park Press Gallery, Colin DeMello. Colin's going to join me in just a few minutes here on the pod, and we're going to talk about a number of different things surrounding that ad, and including the demeanor of Premier Doug Ford. There's a lot of people who watch these Doug Ford news conferences and they either think, yes, you're doing a great job, Doug. Keep fighting for Canada. And then there's some who think the premier is coming off really unhinged. It seems like he's trying to create a fight with Donald Trump. We'll take that up with Colin coming up in just a few minutes right here on Scott Fox After 9. First off, let's talk about the news conference that Premier Ford did yesterday. Here's a little bit of him talking at Queen's Park.
I'm not going to get into he said. Back and forth. I don't think the people of Canada want that. I know one thing, we're united on getting a deal. I have asked him to focus on many areas, but especially on the auto sector, and I know he's doing his best to get that back to the table.
You don't want to correct the public record here? The Prime Minister says he had to apologize, and he said that he asked you specifically not to run the commercial.
Well, again, I'm not going to go back and forth. I had a different recollection of our conversation, but that's, people don't need that. They want to move forward, to get a deal, to protect jobs and protect the economy of Ontario and of Canada.
Premier Ford there refusing to give up the details of exactly what happened between him and Mark Carney. You'll probably recall Premier Ford put out that Ronald Reagan ad. Donald Trump eventually flipped out about the ad and said he was suspending trade negotiations. Premier Ford has already told us that Prime Minister Carney called him several times during the World Series to ask Premier Ford not to continue airing that ad over the weekend. Premier Ford kept running it anyway. And now we find out Prime Minister Carney apologized to Donald Trump for what Doug Ford did. Doug seems to be taking the high road here. Doesn't seem like he wants to throw Prime Minister Carney under the bus. But I still want to know what happened. Did Mark Carney approve that ad or did Doug go rogue?
You don't remember him saying no? You don't remember him saying no?
No, again, I'm not going down that avenue. I know I've talked to him this morning through text message. We have a great relationship. We're focused on the same areas, and that's protecting Canadian jobs, Ontario jobs, the steel sector, the auto sector, life sciences, and manufacturing.
Are you able to share your recollection, Premier? What's your
Again, I'm just not going to go down that avenue. I'm not jumping into that bear trap. We have a great relationship. I'll tell you one thing, what he did do. He called me from Asia a couple times and said, pull the ad. And I said I wasn't going to do it until we're going to pause the ad on Monday. And that's exactly what we did. It was 12.4 billion impressions around the world. And they talked about it on the Senate floor. I love the fact that 4 Republicans jumped over and voted against tariffs on Canada. So they were very effective. And they ended up getting rejuvenating the talks with Democrats and Republicans down in the U.S. that a tariff on Canada is a tax on American people.
Premier Ford, when he does these scrums, it's a little impersonal. I get it. He wants to look into the camera when he's talking. But that means he's not looking at the person right beside him who's asking a question. It looks very robotic. Again, though, Premier Ford refusing to give up the details. He's not going to give us much here other than the Prime Minister asked him to pull the ad, and he did not pull the ad. I wonder how the Prime Minister feels about that, though. Does Carney feel like he doesn't have any control over Doug? Does the Prime Minister feel like he should have some control over Doug? Well, I'll tell you what, those reporters, persistent as they were, finally got Doug to crack and give up just a little bit more.
Prime Minister's tone when he asked you a couple of times to pull the ad, was he personally angry with your actions?
No, he wasn't angry at all. I fully understand the position he's in. He's trying to talk to the president, but the president was going to give us a terrible deal, like they gave UK a terrible deal, gave Japan even a worse deal, in my opinion, and we weren't going to go down that rabbit hole of getting a terrible deal. I always say no deal is better than a bad deal. And that's what President Trump wants. He wants a terrible deal for Canadians. I take a different approach. I want the AmCan Fortress, American-Canadian Fortress, that we can grow the pie, create more jobs, just like Ronald Reagan did. Jobs went up in a massive way when he signed the deal with Prime Minister Brian Mulroney. And we're asking to do the same thing. Tariffs do not work. Anywhere in the world. They especially don't work with your number one customer. And yes, they're our number one customer. So let's grow the pie, as I always say.
That's an interesting clip there. Doug Ford saying he kept the ad running because he didn't want Mark Carney to sign a deal that he felt was bad for Canada. So he was trying to blow up a potential deal. That's what that says to me. Doug heard what was on the table, and he said, hell no, I'm going to blow this thing up. And that Ronald Reagan ad, I think most people will agree, did a pretty sufficient job.
He should have apologized, or are you upset that he apologized?
Well, that's up to the Prime Minister. I'll tell you what I would do. I'd never apologize to Donald Trump. Donald Trump's trying to destroy our province, destroy our country, steal manufacturing jobs and auto sector jobs, steel jobs, aluminum jobs. The list keeps going on. I'll never apologize to President Trump, and I'm going to continue fighting for the people of Ontario and the people of Canada.
Did the Prime Minister give you a heads up that he was going to apologize?
No, he didn't. But that's his prerogative, right? I don't speak for the Prime Minister. I speak as the Premier of Ontario, and I'll never apologize to Donald Trump, ever. They put me on a stretching rack, I wouldn't apologize.
Stretching rack. Oh, that's an interesting way to put that. A stretching rack. Okay, well, listen, that was Premier Doug Ford yesterday talking to reporters outside Queen's Park. I'm going to bring in our special guest for this episode now because I think that this person has a lot to offer in helping you understand exactly what's going on, what went on, and where things are going. He is, again, the Queen's Park Bureau Chief for Global News. He's the host of Focus Ontario, and he's the president of the Queen's Park Press Gallery. Special guest on Scott Fox After 9. Welcome, Colin DeMello. Colin, how you doing?
Hey, thank you so much for having me. Doing well, thank you.
Good. It's really great that you could come on the pod today. And I don't think I have ever seen a time where there is so much international focus on a government in Ontario. What a time to be alive.
I mean, this definitely is novel, right? I mean, most Ontario premiers would dream of being known outside of their own province. But here, Doug Ford is on the radar of the White House, which is something that is, uncharted territory. We don't know where all of this is going to go and how Donald Trump will ultimately react to any further provocation from Doug Ford.
Yeah, and it kind of seems like, as an outsider, like Doug is really trying to push Trump's buttons. It seems like he's trying to get under Trump's skin. Is that the way you're reading this, or am I off here?
Well, I think you have to kind of go back to the February election to kind of understand this moment where we're at, right? During the February election, which was a snap election where Doug Ford tried to take advantage of the fact that Donald Trump was going to be inaugurated, he really had this Captain Canada moment where, the federal government had an absence where Justin Trudeau had announced that he was going to be resigning. There wasn't a prime minister really in play at that moment before Mark Carney had come in. And so the premiers really stepped into that fray, and Doug Ford really kind of donned this Captain Canada hat. And, people really enjoyed seeing somebody vocalize what they were feeling. And Doug Ford was really good at kind of tapping into that emotion that everyday Ontarians and Canadians really were feeling. But then during the election, there was a moment where he was caught on a hot mic saying, he wanted Donald Trump to win. He was supportive of Trump. until, he stuck a knife in Ontario and Canada, the premier talking about Donald Trump. And I think ever since that moment where it was kind of revealed that, he supported Donald Trump right up until 2024, that I think is what he's still trying to get away from. And that is why he appears to be so focused on really poking Donald Trump as much as possible.
It seems like there's a couple of different schools of thought on how Doug is conducting himself right now as premier, but also sort of the chief spokesperson for Team Canada. And some people think, good for you, Doug. Don't take any nonsense from that guy. And there's other people who feel like he's coming a little unhinged, like he's actually losing it. He goes crazy anytime somebody mentions the name Donald Trump. You spend more time as a reporter around the premier than most people do. What's your read on how Doug is feeling right now and where he sees his role in this?
Well, the premier really is consistent in how he approaches Donald Trump, right? Ever since that election, his mindset has been to stand up to a person who he views as a bully. And the premier says that, Donald Trump responds to strength, and therefore somebody has to show strength. But we've got a brand new negotiating team at the table. That is Mark Carney, Dominic LeBlanc, and a couple of others with the federal government who are really leading the negotiations. And so the question kind of has to be asked repeatedly, are Doug Ford's actions helping the cause or hurting the cause? And, nobody knows exactly what's happening in the negotiations. Nobody knows exactly what's happening in Donald Trump's mind. Things can change from minute to minute, day by day. However, what we have seen is this commercial specifically, the reaction that came from Donald Trump. There have been a lot of columnists and others, commentators who have looked at this and said, well, what did we expect the reaction to be? He's a very mercurial type of president. He's a very reactionary type of president. And anything that kind of sets him off, the reaction is going to be disproportionate to the action that was actually taken. So people are kind of saying, well, what did Doug Ford expect here when placing that commercial? And secondly, we have seen kind of the fallout, right, where Ontario had to pull the commercial. It's led to a suspension of the trade talks. The prime minister had to apologize to the president. That was his own doing, but he apologized nonetheless. And the prime minister said he advised Doug Ford, don't run the ad because it could be detrimental. So as of right now, trade talks haven't resumed. There is no deal that's in place. And the larger industries in Ontario, that being the manufacturing sector, particularly autos, are still at risk. So, Doug Ford has kind of leaned into this kind of Captain Canada, stand up to the bully and, show strength in the face of this kind of attack from the United States. But the underlying question is, what has that netted us in terms of, everyday Ontarians or everyday Canadians?
Right, because it seems a little counterintuitive. I mean, he's going aggressively after Doug, but we've got more tariffs now than we did, and we're losing auto jobs and jobs in other industries as well. And people are really asking that question, is it working? What do you think the premier thinks? Does he think what he's doing is working?
Well, look, the premier has a running tally, Scott, of every time there are 100 million more views or 1 billion more views of this commercial. His staff keep him consistently informed of how many impressions this thing has had. He's talked about how far the reach is, far beyond North America. He's talked about how he's heard about it being talked about in India, in the UK, and other parts of the G7 as well. And he's looking at success differently from you and I might look at success here, right? We just talked about how it could have been detrimental, but he views it as, okay, well, there's a conversation in the United States about how a revered American Republican president viewed tariffs, and it's very polar opposite to how Donald Trump views tariffs. He says, there have been 4 Republicans, as an example, Mitch McConnell being one of them, who voted in favor of removing tariffs against Canada, and he views that as a win. But ultimately, all of these policies are decided by Donald Trump. And the 2 times that there's been Ontario provocation, it's resulted in negative consequences. The first time, you might recall, earlier this year, Doug Ford decided to follow through on an electricity surcharge. There was a 25% surcharge applied to electricity that goes to 3 U.S. states, including New York State and Michigan. And what Trump's reaction was to jack up tariffs on Canada by about 25%. And so you can very quickly see from that example and from this example, it follows a pattern, right? Doug Ford kind of wants to have a showmanship moment in Canada. He, responds by with some kind of a measure that, whether deliberately or not, provokes the American president. He retaliates with tariffs or some kind of action, and then Ontario quickly backs down. But the damage still remains in place. And so I'm not sure what would happen if this happened a third time. How could it break the talks down altogether, or could it have some kind of an opening for us? That's yet to be revealed. But the pattern here appears to be Canada always loses.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about that ad, because it seems like the circumstances are not agreed upon here. Doug Ford says he personally showed the ad to Mark Carney. And then after that, it gets a little blurry. Did Carney approve this ad? And we know now that Carney said stop running the ad. Do we know for sure one way or the other if he approved of it in the first place?
So we don't know for sure whether he approved of it or not, but he's certainly making his disapproval of the commercial well known. So, to kind of go through the timeline here, Doug Ford says that at some point, he was the one who was kind of driving this Ronald Reagan commercial. Somebody had either sent him or he had seen this 1987 speech that Ronald Reagan had given. It was a radio address to the nation talking about tariffs. And he decided, okay, well, why don't we take this and blast it out to Americans, specifically in Republican states, in order to kind of generate a conversation. The premier starts debuting this commercial in Canada at a number of events. One was a U.S.-Canada summit. Another one was at the Empire Club. And he talks about the benefits he thinks of this commercial, which was, again, to kind of, show to Americans, hey, someone you revere hated these tariffs. Why aren't you speaking up about it more to the American president? And then the premier had a meeting with Mark Carney at his home in Etobicoke. The premier says Mark Carney's chief of staff and the prime minister were aware of this commercial. And the prime minister then also said that at that same meeting, he told the premier, don't run the commercial. Now, the commercial ran for several days. Trump had commented on it, saying, he would have taken the same ad if it were him in this position. But then days later, Trump changed his mind and said, no, this is a fake commercial. It's taking Ronald Reagan's words out of context, which it is not, and decided to suspend trade talks. Then Mark Carney had, called Doug Ford multiple times, telling him, you need to take down the commercial. Ford decided to run the commercial 2 more times during the World Series, the first couple of games of the World Series, which were played here in Toronto. And now Mark Carney is saying, look, he told Ford, don't run the commercial. But to your point, Scott, there is a very key question here. Was this approved by the federal government or not? What the federal government is now saying is, look, these negotiations are in the domain of the federal government, and it is not up to other premiers. While they can have their opinions, it's not up to them to participate in these negotiations. And so what we're seeing is British Columbia, which was looking to run similar commercials, has decided they're going to back off. Alberta is saying, we're going to give the federal government our support. And so it appears that some premiers are falling in line behind the federal government, but Doug Ford is still agitating.
Right. Do you think the relationship between Ford and Carney was damaged when Carney offered that apology to the president? Because I think yesterday, Premier Ford was very emphatic that he would never apologize to Donald Trump.
I mean, I think this is maybe a hiccup in the relationship, but no long-term damage. I mean, remember, Ontario and Ottawa really need each other, right? Ontario needs billions of dollars in transfers that come from Ottawa every year, and Ontario wants more money every single year, as does every province, and the only way to kind of do that is to have a good, positive, healthy relationship. Doug Ford had a great relationship with Justin Trudeau, and that led to billions and billions of dollars flowing to Ontario. In fact, Ontario has struck deals with Stellantis and Volkswagen to have these mega factories to build electric vehicle batteries, and that was only possible because the federal government put up billions of dollars to convince those companies to come here. So there is a relationship that Ontario needs with the federal government. And remember, Mark Carney is in a minority government, and minority governments convert to majority governments by winning enough seats in Ontario, right? Ontario represents the most number of seats, and Ontario typically tends to have a lot of swing voters as well, particularly in the 905 belt from Mississauga to Brampton, Vaughan, and the eastern 905 as well in Durham region. And so as a result, both men need each other. They don't need to be sniping at one another. And I think, they also want to present as much of a unified front as possible to the American government. So while this may have been a hiccup in the relationship, Mark Carney has said that he doesn't lead with emotion. He's going to lead with rationality. And so I don't think this will last too long.
Okay, let me play a bit of an exchange that you had yesterday with Premier Ford, and then we're going to discuss, because I thought this was an excellent question for the Premier, using his own words back at him.
Question.
Is there any part of you that accepts that perhaps what Ontario did with the commercial may have led to some negative consequences for Canada?
Not at all. It gave us strength, if anything. You roll over with President Trump. We've seen what President Trump does. He smells weakness, he'll latch on you like a pit bull. And we should never, ever show weakness with President Trump. We're his number one customer. He needs us as much as we need them. And that's why we need to put this aside and start getting a good deal for Canada and the U.S.
But then why not continue running the commercial? Pulling the commercial shows weakness. Why not continue?
Last question.
President Trump wanted me to pull it one day, and I took 3 more days, and we paused it to get back to the table. It was very, very effective. I've been getting endless calls from a lot of people down in the U.S. and right across our country to say, way to go, keep going, and we'll never stop fighting for Ontario and Canadian jobs. But thanks, everybody.
Yeah, it's great that you got that question in. Does it show weakness that we stopped running the ad, or is that just Ontario now playing ball again with our federal government?
Well, I think the point of that question is to really kind of try to, squeeze the Premier a little bit, right, to figure out where he views his own actions, right? If apologizing to the federal, to Trump might be showing weakness, and if weakness is detrimental to us, well, why did he back down himself? I think that was kind of the aim of the question here, is to try to understand how the Premier views his own actions and why he decided to pull the commercial. And one of the most important things the Premier said there was he decided to pull the commercial in order to get back to the bargaining table. So the Premier had an objective running the commercial, which was to raise a conversation, and then there was another objective to pulling the commercial, which was to get back to the bargaining table. Objective 1 has been achieved. There's no doubt that this is a conversation that's been happening across the country, across North America as well, and this conversation we're having is an example of that. But the secondary objective, which some might say might be the most important objective, has yet to be realized, and we don't know when that might be realized. So it's trying to kind of display that, politicians sometimes want to present both sides of the argument and want to champion both sides of the argument, when sometimes those two arguments they clash with one another. And I think in this case, it definitely clashes. How can one action from one level of government be seen as weakness, but his action is not seen as weakness? And doesn't all of it, show to Donald Trump that this country is a bit divided, and the infighting is something that the U.S. can take advantage of?
It seems to me that Doug Ford might be, and I think the opposition parties are starting to realize this as well. To some people, it seems like Doug Ford is really sort of auditioning to eventually run for the federal conservative leadership. Do you think that's something that's in the cards right now? I mean, he didn't support Pierre Poilievre during the election, and he is taking on a bit of a national role here. Do you think he has ambitions to be prime minister?
I think earlier this year I would have said yes. It is now back into the unsure column because I don't know. I think the Premier has a lot of ambitions, and I think federally his ambition has always been there. But the actions that he took during the last federal election, when, as you said, he didn't support Pierre Poilievre, but then I think, the Premier and some of his advisors kind of took one step further by criticizing the campaign team and criticizing Pierre Poilievre as well. That has done a lot of damage within the conservative movement in terms of how they view Doug Ford. Remember, the federal Conservative Party is much more idealistic in their approach, right? They are much more hardline conservative. And in any leadership race, you end up getting more hardline, more staunch party members coming out because they really want to see the party stay true to its roots. And when you're talking about the Conservative Party, you're going to have a lot of Western Canadians, Alberta, Saskatchewan, etc., who will have a disproportionate voice in a federal leadership race. That might not necessarily be to Doug Ford's advantage because while he's, one can argue that how he might be viewed in Ontario, but he definitely, according to polls, has Ontario fairly locked down right now. But how do more staunch conservatives view him? They don't view him as a fundamental conservative. And then you have the other problem that he doesn't speak French, and too, obviously, Quebecers, that would be a huge issue as well. So I would say don't rule out Premier Doug Ford's ambitions in wanting to seek the federal Conservative leadership if that eventually comes to pass. But as of right now, I would firmly put it in the unsure column.
Got it. Where does Team Canada stand right now? Earlier this year, there were a ton of photo ops and meetings regularly between the premiers, and it seems like lately, Alberta and Saskatchewan in particular are very quiet. You don't see Danielle Smith and Scott Moe with Premier Ford very often anymore, and he doesn't talk about them as much as he used to either.
No, I mean, Team Canada still exists on paper in theory, but there has been a lot more kind of returning back to the normal where, each individual premier is kind of agitating against the federal government. Look, it is always a truth in our political system that, provincial governments, the 13 premiers, will always kind of push back and fight with the federal government because, sometimes, and in Ontario's case, the opposition currently doesn't have really the strength to be able to take on Doug Ford. The Ontario Liberals are still kind of figuring out who they are. The Ontario NDP is trying to have a resurgence, but they've had some setbacks as well. So when the premier needs to fight with someone, sometimes he'll pick the federal government as that opponent because it's bigger and they have a lot more sway and power. So you can fight with that David versus Goliath kind of scenario. But you're right. I mean, Danielle Smith, surprisingly, has complimented Mark Carney more than you would expect a Western Canadian premier to actually compliment a Liberal prime minister. She has said, and I've been in interviews with her in which we've talked about how, Donald Trump and Mark Carney, when they were in the White House, there was a lot of backslapping going on. I asked Danielle Smith how she viewed that, and she said, she thought that was a positive thing. Anything that kind of leads to a positive outcome for Canada, she thinks is a good thing. And she firmly believes that relationship building is what we should focus on as opposed to kind of poking the Americans in the eye. Alberta, as an example, has allowed American alcohol to return to the shelves of the Alberta liquor stores, something that Ontario still hasn't done. So there definitely are divisions. I don't think they're fundamental cracks because the premier still has good relationships with all of them. But no, they're not all getting together and talking about, the Team Canada on the same platform anymore. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means that for now, that voice is quieted down.
Okay, you mentioned opposition parties, and I'm wondering, what's your take on the Ontario Liberals at the moment? It seems like they're in no real hurry to replace Bonnie Crombie, and I'm not sure that anybody has really stepped forward and said, I want to be the Premier of Ontario and represent the Ontario Liberal Party.
Yeah, well, the Ontario Liberal Party has to go through this process where they have to figure out exactly what the rules are going to be, what the timeline is for the actual leadership race, how much money you have to raise, how much money you have to give in as a deposit, as an example, and then how many signatures you might need from party members. Should they be from all 124 ridings? There's a lot of little details that the planning committee has to go through and approve before they can call the leadership race. To the point of candidates, you're right. I mean, we have not heard, and there has been a lot of behind-the-scenes work from a lot of candidates, but no one has come out yet and firmly said, I'm in, I'm running, I want to be the next Premier of Ontario, and I want to do it as an Ontario Liberal. And we haven't seen kind of the big star candidate kind of come out, somebody who would be, in this era of politics, which is, driven by meme culture and is, driven by, who has the biggest personality in the room. We haven't seen that type of individual come out yet to say, I'm going to take on Doug Ford. There have been a lot of names that have been thrown around. There have been some people who definitely are making calls, trying to figure out what their support level is and whether or not they can do it. But as of right now, the party is a bit listless. And Bonnie Crombie herself is also in an interesting position. She's getting paid by the party about $180,000 a year.
Wow.
But since she resigned as party leader, so she's resigned, but she hasn't officially resigned. She'll leave her role once the new leader is selected. Scott, she hasn't shown up to Queen's Park once.
Wow.
We haven't heard from her once. She's not held a news conference. She's not spoken publicly. She's not done anything related to her job, as we can see, as the leader of the Ontario Liberal Party. But the party is still happy to pay her about $180,000 a year. And that's been a really interesting development, I will say, over the last number of weeks.
I got to wonder how Ontario Liberal supporters feel about that. I mean, that's just wasted money that could go into the next campaign.
And that's absolutely right? I mean, the question remains of what are you paying this individual for? Now, the party, continues to say, well, listen, she did a lot for the party. She took the party from a party without status, which was under 12 seats, to 14 seats in the legislature, which is a party now with status. That means that they get millions of dollars in terms of research budgets and a lot more support from the Ontario legislature. She also brought in a lot of money in terms of donations. So they're saying some elected MPPs are saying, look, she did a lot to bring our party to a new level, therefore we kind of owe her something. But, everyday Ontarians don't get to collect a salary, do nothing, and also look for another job.
Yeah.
I think to your point, that's where Ontario Liberals might look at this and say, wait a second.
Yeah.
I'm donating to this party. Am I just donating for a lame duck salary?
Yeah, and it kind of feels that way. One more thing here, because I've taken up a lot of your time, but this is really great stuff. As you and I talk, the budget has not come out yet, but it will at 4 o'clock this afternoon. What's your best guess? Do you think we're going to a Christmas election?
I don't think so. I think ultimately you have to look at the state of the parties, right? The federal Conservative Party still has strength. I mean, they earned more votes in the party history, in Canadian history, than they ever have before. So I think they're really standing on a new platform there where they've been able to bring in a lot of union supporters, blue-collar workers. They've been able to convert a lot of young people into the Conservative camp as well. So they are in a position of strength to be able to fight another election. The Ontario Liberal, the federal Liberals, are in a position of strength to be able to fight another election. But the NDP is not, right? The NDP lost their leader. They have to have a leadership race at some point. They're not an official party. And really, this boils down to them. So will they abstain from voting for the budget, which would mean that the budget would pass because there aren't enough votes against it? I think that's a key question. I don't think that there's an appetite for another election. I think it feels like from polling that a lot of Canadians feel that Mark Carney is the man for the moment to take on the economy and to take on Trump. It appears that polls haven't really dramatically changed one way or the other, so we could end up with an expensive election and the exact same result. And so the question is, what will the NDP do in this scenario? I don't think that the NDP feels like they're in a position to really fight another election so soon after being decimated in the last election. So I think this might all come down to that calculus for that party, and I don't think we're going to have another election. But I could be wrong. Let's see. Politics is a wild sport, and in this era of politics especially, it is all unpredictable.
I agree. One more thing. I could talk to you all day, I think, but is this skills development controversy, scandal at Queen's Park going anywhere? Do you think that this is going to result in changes in government or in various ministries? Do you think charges could get laid? I'm hearing so much hyperbole about it, and I'm trying to figure out if this is a real thing.
So to explain it really easily, the Ontario government started a fund. It's about $2.5 billion right now of taxpayer dollars. And this fund is supposed to help reskill and retrain people across the province, right? It's supposed to help people who might come from underprivileged communities or underprivileged circumstances, right? A person with Down syndrome, as an example, or a person who may have had a long criminal history, what have you, really get a leg up. It helps them reskill or train in a field that they may not have been exposed to before, and then find a job, whether it's a part-time job or a full-time job, in the trades, and really be able to build a new life. So on its surface, that's what this fund is supposed to do. But when you go beneath the surface and look at how the fund is being distributed, it appears that the Progressive Conservative government is prioritizing those who have connections to the Progressive Conservative government. If a group that has donated to the PC party, that group has been receiving Skills Development Fund money. Lobbyists who are connected to the Progressive Conservative Party, they lobby for applicants, and they get the money, a disproportionate amount of money than those who don't lobby. And what the Auditor General had found was that in a lot of cases, the government had a list of criteria for who should get the money, and an applicant would be ranked on that criteria. And for some reason, a lot of applicants that ranked low were given money as opposed to applicants that were ranked high. And the idea here is if you're ranked high, you might have a better outcome than if you're ranked low, right? It's taxpayer dollars. And so the question here is really building. Why is it that certain people who have connections to the government, who might be preferred by the government, why are they getting more money than others? So the fundamental question is, this is your money. This is my money. We go to work every day. We pay our taxes to the provincial government. And the government is then using that money, according to the Auditor General, to in some cases benefit those who either donate to the PC party or help the Ford government in terms of endorsements during the next election. So you can see how it seems a bit circular, and it seems to benefit the party in power. And I think that is at its core the question. Now, the government has put up a lot of defense on this. They say, the priorities of this province are to build things, hospitals, schools, bridges, roads, and that's why they're prioritizing, in some cases, low-ranking applicants. In some cases, you might come from an underprivileged circumstance, and they're prioritizing those people, even though the outcomes might be low. It's a bit of a shot in the dark because they're hoping it'll lead to a positive outcome. So, and the Premier has been supportive of the Labour Minister. The Labour Minister has, spoken in defense of this fund on multiple occasions. So it doesn't seem like at this point the scandal is going anywhere, but with these kinds of things, it builds and it builds and it builds. There will be more complaints about it, and the government is still under an active RCMP investigation from the Greenbelt. So it's anybody's guess where something like this might go.
Very interesting stuff. Colin DeMello, thank you so much for your time today. This was great chatting with you.
It's my absolute pleasure, Scott. And if I can say this, I know you get this all the time, but, my entire high school 4 years was spent waking up to you in the morning. So,
I love that.
It is an honor. It is an honor for me to be able to talk to you.
I really appreciate that. Colin DeMello is the Queen's Park Bureau Chief for Global News. You can see him hosting Focus Ontario, and he's the president of the Queen's Park Press Gallery. Colin, let's do this again sometime soon, okay?
Anytime.
Love talking to you. Have a great day.
You too. Thank you.
That was a good chat. Thanks, everybody, for checking out this episode of Scott Fox After 9. Just a reminder, tomorrow we're talking about the federal budget and whether or not there's going to be a December election. Don't miss it. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. If you haven't already, leave a review. I would love 5 stars, but you do you and give me whatever you think is fair. I'll catch you right back here in less than 24 hours. And as always, I'll leave you with the sounds of Pat James and the whole truth. Hey now.